Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. The first experience that I had with the work of Mario Vargas Llosa, and yes, by the way, I am Argentinian and my pronunciation tells you that, was with a little novella titled Los Cachorros, or The Cubs. It doesn't get a lot of attention in translation, but let me tell you, it's a little tour de force. So if you get the chance to read that, please do so, okay, because it's just an amazing novella. After that, I read a collection of short stories by him titled Los Jefes. And after that, it was that I tried my first long novel by Vargas Llosa, which was La Ciudad y los Perros. This is known in English as The Time of the Hero, I guess because the title, the city and the dogs, somebody thought it might not work, right? So this was my first experience of his work, and this was just a novel that I absolutely loved, just because of its sheer narrative power. So for my Nobel Prize podcast or series that I'm doing, I thought I would read one of the big ones. Okay, I wanted to go for one of Vargas Llosa's truly important novels, and I had copies of two of them. One of them was Conversación en la Catedral, Conversation in the Cathedral, and the other one was La Fiesta del Chivo, The Feast of the Goat. Both of them seem to me equally important, but I chose Conversación en la Catedral, or Conversation in the Cathedral, because in my little Spanish edition, it comes with a prologue in which Mario Vargas Llosa says that if he had to rescue one of the novels that he had written from the flames, this would be it. Let me show you the English edition that I have. So I thought that by itself, the fact that this novel is very close to its author was something important. So I spent 2 weeks reading it, and they were 2 wonderful, amazing weeks. Now we're talking about the Nobel Prize. We're going with that podcast right here. So let me share with you the citation for Mario Vargas Llosa. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 2010. I still remember when it was announced. And this is the citation, quote, "For his cartography of structures of power and his trenchant images of the individual's resistance, revolt, and defeat." I love the word cartography right there. This idea of just putting together some kind of a map. It's a political map, it's a social map, it's a spiritual map, in the sense that it traces the mood and the anxieties of Peruvian society through the years, and also other societies in Latin America, because as you may know, Vargas Llosa's novels are not just set in Peru. Some of them are set in other places, right? For example, Brazil and many other countries. So Conversation in the Cathedral was published in the year 1969, and Vargas Llosa said that this was the novel that he found most difficult to write, the novel that he said me dio más trabajo, so it gave him more work, literally, but more of a difficult time when it comes to writing it. The story is set in Peru in the 1950s during the dictatorship of Manuel Odría. So that is the context, the historical and social context that we have. That dictatorship, by the way, lasted 8 years. And according to Vargas Llosa, this was a time, he said, of cynicism, of apathy, of resignation, and of moral decay. So that is not really a good combination, but if you look at dictatorships throughout Latin America and in other places too, you can see what he means by that. The novel really portrays that perfectly, that atmosphere that Vargas Llosa describes so well. The back cover of the English edition describes it as a haunting tale of power, corruption, and the complex search for identity. So we really have quite an explosive mix here, not only with the mood that Vargas Llosa describes, but also with the kind of thing that the novel is trying to do in tracing these destinies that we are going to find out about as we read. By the way, the translation was by Gregory Rabassa. Okay, you may have heard the name. He translated Cortázar's Hopscotch, Cien Años de Soledad, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márquez, and many other very important works of Latin American literature. So we have a very good translation in our hands. Now, as far as this novel can be said to be about anything, it is about Peruvian society in the 1950s during the dictatorship of Odría. So there is not a single, one single storyline here, but there are many of them. And that is what we're going to explore, because at first the novel may seem a little bit complex. It is in a way, and in a way it is not. But let's explore that a little bit. We have 2 main characters. They are, on the one hand, Santiago. He's also known as Zabalita. He refers to himself as that because his last name is Zavala. And on the other hand, we have Ambrosio. It says Ambrosia here in the back cover. No, it's Ambrosio, okay? Ambrosio Pardo. He is El Sambo. He's referred to as a Sambo. A Sambo is a person of mixed origin. He has African roots and native roots, okay? So that is Ambrosio. And he was once Santiago's father's chauffeur. So there's a connection between them. And at the beginning of the novel, when we start reading, they meet quite by chance. Okay, it's quite unexpected, something surprising for them. And so they decide to go to a bar called La Catedral, or the Cathedral. And that's when they start to talk and they start to reminisce and they look back on the years of the dictatorship. So one important thing to keep in mind here is that, yes, this is not a conversation in a literal cathedral, but in a bar known as the Cathedral. So that's why in the title, sometimes you'll see that the article is capitalized, La Catedral. In the English version, they didn't do that, but they kind of should, because that way, that's the way it was in the original Spanish. Santiago belongs to an upper class family, okay? And this family is composed by his father, Don Fermín, his mother, Doña Zoila. Then he has a brother known as El Chispas, Sparky in English, and he has a sister named Tete. And then on the other hand, you have Ambrosio, who is lower class, right? And at one point he gets involved with a girl named Amalia, and Amalia is the maid of the Zavala family. And there are all of these connections that the novel traces. So notice what Vargas Llosa is doing. He gives you an important character from the upper class, right? And his family, and then on the other hand you have a lower class character. But we are missing one very important ingredient, and that is the character who is involved with the regime directly, with the dictatorship of Odría. So the character who is kind of allied to whoever happens to be in power. And we do get that through the character of a guy named Cacho Bermúdez. Okay, that's once again my Argentinian pronunciation, so keep that in mind, please. And this is the third, I would say, important narrative thread in Conversación en la Catedral. So you have these three threads that are kind of interwoven. And Cacho Bermúdez is the guy who represents the person who is allied with those in power. He lives with a woman named Hortensia, and then at one point there is another woman known as La Queca who enters the picture. And what the novel does is basically to trace the destinies of all of these characters, and these are very closely interwoven in the novel. So it's done in a really masterful way. You're going to notice that it's like a braid, you know, like a social braid with different planes there, social planes, right, when it comes to status and social class. So talking about structure, if you look at the English edition, this is 600 pages in length. My little pocket Spanish one is 755 pages long. The novel is divided into 4 parts. They are very long, and they have different numbers of chapters, okay? But for the most part, it's kind of a balanced novel, I would say, when it comes to the structure. And I would say, you know, I want to say this, I don't know if many people would agree with me, but I think Conversación en la Catedral is not as complex as it may seem, because you can think of this as a very long conversation between the two characters, between Santiago or Zabalita and Ambrosio. And these conversations are interlaced with conversations and events that happened in the past. So it's like, you know, that good old idea that I love so much of the past intruding on the present. This is a dialogic novel. It's a novel of voices, right? So if you like that kind of thing, you're going to love Conversation in the Cathedral. You're going to notice that, just kind of like as a guide to the reading, the conversation that is happening in the present tense between Santiago and Ambrosio, the narrator uses the present tense when describing that. So for example, it's going to say Santiago says, Ambrosio says. So whenever you have that present tense, you can tell that that is the conversation that is happening at the cathedral, the bar. And then all of the other conversations, which are described in the past, you know, Don Fermín said, for example, those are the ones that are from the past, you know, that they are kind of evoked as the two characters have this very long conversation at the bar. But here's the thing. the events are not really related to us in a linear fashion. And that is where you could say that this novel is a little bit complex. But then again, we are in the Latin American boom, right? So we would expect something like that. You can see the influence of William Faulkner right there, right? With this idea of different time periods presented in a disjointed fashion. So Vargas Llosa does that very well. You know, I did not feel lost as I was reading this novel, even though we jump back and forth in time. I absolutely love that kind of structure. This is really like we are being offered the pieces of a puzzle and we put it together as we read. So yes, this is one of those just keep reading novels, okay? Just like Hopscotch. That is what I tell people who want to read Hopscotch. Just keep reading, you know, in the stories of Cortázar also. Just keep reading and you're going to find out who these characters are and what the interactions are between them. So I thought we would look at kind of, you know, some themes, some important themes that this novel touches upon, and we would just go that way with a kind of a thematic approach. And the first one that I wanted to sort of touch upon is politics, okay? I really like how this novel portrays the political landscape of Peru during the Odría dictatorship in the 1950s. Santiago is a college student, especially in the first part. Then we see how he becomes a journalist. But in part one of the novel, he's a college student. So it really gives you a very good idea of, you know, the allure of leftist ideas at that time, you know, Marxism, socialism. And this is all, you know, covered, I would say, or characterized by great idealism, a kind of a romanticism also, you know, the time of youth, the time of the college years, right? And all the romanticism that goes with that, wanting change and all that, especially in a society that is under some kind of repression, as we can see in this case. So I would say the university functions as a kind of microcosm of Peru, just as the school did in the time of the hero and as the brothel does in the greenhouse, for example. So Vargas Llosa is really good at choosing the setting as a type of microcosm. Santiago at one point likes a girl named Aida, and this girl is really involved in politics. She is an activist. So you can see how she kind of follows her. You know, it's kind of like an awakening for him. And as a matter of fact, you could look at Conversation in the Cathedral as a kind of political and sentimental education for Santiago Zavala. So that is definitely one of the ways that you can read the novel. The next thing that I wanted to kind of explore very briefly is the issue, very important in this novel and in most of Vargas Llosa, of social class, okay? So because Santiago belongs to an upper class family, his father, Fermin, for example, is a senator and he is with Odría's government. We see the interaction between the upper class and also the maids and the chauffeurs and the help, as it is known. So this really portrays a society in which social class really is very rigid, right? And it's very difficult to move upward when it comes to that. This is typical of Latin America, okay? And Mario Vargas Llosa is very good at portraying that because he lived with it, he grew up with it, he witnessed this kind of social structure. And the interesting thing is that these planes, right, the upper class, the lower class, are kind of like overlapping. They're overlapping planes, and they are like networks, because the characters within each one of these planes are interconnected in ways that sometimes they don't even realize. So we're looking at that old idea of the 6 degrees of separation in a way, and you're going to find as you read how the characters are connected in ways that sometimes they don't seem to be aware of, and it's just fascinating and so true to life, right? Because that is what happens in real life. We see a society here that pays very close attention to class, to color, okay, to ethnicity, to race. Throughout the novel, you're going to hear that cholos are mentioned and referred to. You know, a cholo, as we said before in another video, is mestizo, is a person of mixed heritage, European and native. So these people are very aware of that. There is a lot of racism and class struggle that is portrayed in this novel. And then we also wanted to talk a little bit, we need to, I think, about the issue of sex. Sex is a very important dimension to this novel, especially towards the end, I would say, especially in part 3 and part 4. When you get to the end of the novel, you see a lot more of that. At one point, Santiago becomes a journalist, as I told you before. And when you get to part 3, what happens is that, basically by chance, Santiago finds himself having to cover a murder. There's the murder of a woman, a very famous entertainer known as La Musa, or the Muse, and he has to cover that. And it turns out that Cacho Bermudez is also involved in this whole problem and in this whole thing that happened. So you hear about Cacho's sexual life and about also those of his woman, right, Hortensia, and her friend La Queca. So this is explored in very, very great detail, in a way that is kind of lurid at times. And we also find out that Santiago's father is somehow involved, and he has one heck of a secret, okay? And that's all that I'm going to say, because I don't want to ruin the reading experience for you. So you're going to find out about these characters and their very dark passions, let's put it that way. There are a couple of subgenres that I wanted to also explore and tell you a little bit about, because I feel that they are at play here in Conversation in the Cathedral. The first one is the total novel, okay, as a subgenre, right? So look at this thing. I mean, you're gonna read it and you're gonna be like, hey, Mario, come on, this could have been like 200 pages shorter. There are many things that you're going to find in this novel that you might think, okay, this was really unnecessary. It was unnecessary to include this. The novel would not have lost any of its power if you had taken out this particular scene, this particular conversation right there. But this is a total novel. So it's a novel that is trying to explore the totality of human experience in a given context. In this case, of course, the life of Peru in the 1950s during the dictatorship of Manuel Odría. What are other total novels? Well, we could speak, of course, of Ulysses by James Joyce. We could talk of Hopscotch. Okay, we should also mention Life, User's Manual by Georges Perec. Basically everything that Thomas Pynchon ever wrote. By the way, many videos from Jorge's Corner on these books or authors. You could also throw in the novels of Roberto Bolaño, especially the big ones like 2666 and The Savage Detectives. So you know what I mean when I say the total novel right here. And you're going to notice that many, if not most, of these total novels are also urban novels. And there's a reason for that. It's like the city kind of gathers everything into itself. It absorbs everything. It is a focus, right? So that does make sense to me. And the other subgenre that I wanted to look at is the X-ray novel. That's what I called it when I talked about Berlin Alexanderplatz. And that is the reason why I call it the X-ray novel, because they are these novels that capture a certain zeitgeist, okay? And the Alfred Döblin novel is a very good example. We could also mention Journey to the End of the Night by Celine, The Hive or La Colmena by Camilo José Cela. That's kind of a tongue twister for me right there. I did a video on La Colmena and Berlin Alexanderplatz if you're interested. So that kind of gives you an idea what we're talking about, the X-ray novel. It's a novel that includes a story, yes, or many of them, but more than that, what it tries to do is to capture a mood or an atmosphere. It dissects an entire society in order to diagnose a problem, or at least to make us aware of it, and at least to try to make it a little bit understood, to try to reach some kind of understanding of this social illness that is going on, the reasons, right, and the circumstances of it. The novel's central question, okay, is one that you're going to find on the second sentence, basically. So Mario Vargas Llosa loses or wastes no time when it comes to, telling you what it is that this is going to be about. The question is, at what precise moment had Peru effed itself up? Okay, so what is wrong with us as a society and why? That is what the novel is trying to explore. And this being a great novel, it's not going to give you easy answers. Okay, the novel itself, the stories themselves are the answer to the question. So what is the answer? Well, we read the novel, and based on that we can put together kind of a theory or a hypothesis. But I believe the novel itself, in all its complexity and with all its loose ends, if you will, because this is a total novel, it doesn't leave you unsatisfied, though, by the way. That is the answer itself. So, bottom line, when I started reading Conversation in the Cathedral, I'm going to be honest with you, I was a little bit lost. I was a little bit confused and frustrated even. I was expecting something along the lines of La Ciudad y los Perros, which is just a fantastic narrative, so well done, so polished, so neat in many ways. Conversation in the Cathedral is a little bit different. But as I was reading, and everything began to click, and I was able to put the pieces together, I was like, wow, this novel completely absorbed me, and just by the fictional world that Vargas Llosa is able to create in this book was just something that completely absorbed me. And I reached a point actually when I had to remind myself that I had not lived in Peru in the 1950s. That's how good it is. You emerge from this thing with a view. I'm not sure if an understanding would be a good way to put it, but definitely a view, a vision of what society was like back then. This is a document. It's a novel, but it's a document too. If the dialogic novel, this whole idea of dialogue, does not appeal to you, then I would say definitely try The Time of the Hero or The Greenhouse. But if you're okay with novels that rely primarily on dialogue, then I think really that Conversation in the Cathedral is just a very good option for you. It was the one that was closest to Vargas Llosa's own heart, so I think that says a lot. I think it's very important when an author has a certain cariño. I'm going to use the word in Spanish there for one of his books. Sometimes that doesn't tell you anything. Or, there are authors who thought, oh, my masterpiece is this one, and it's the book that nobody reads or the one that nobody pays attention to. Cervantes, he didn't think that Don Quixote was his masterpiece. And to us, that may be like, what? It's the only one that most people read, But in this case, it was Conversation in the Cathedral. And I think there's just a power to it, okay, that kind of suggests why Vargas Llosa felt that way, besides that idea that he mentioned, the fact that it was the one that gave him the most trouble when it comes to writing it. It took him, I believe, about 3 years to write this novel, and he rewrote many parts of it. So I definitely recommend this novel. I really enjoyed it in a very different way than I enjoyed The Time of the Hero. But I'm going to keep exploring, of course, the work of Mario Vargas Llosa, because everything that I've read by him has been amazing, not a disappointment at all, and just makes me want to keep reading. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. Those were my 2 cents on Conversation in the Cathedral by Mario Vargas Llosa. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.